and welcome to UC Today. My name is Kristian McCann, and today's session is exploring how to overcome AI disillusionment and Copilot adoption challenges. And joining me to tell me all about it is Steve Daly, Senior Vice President of Solutions and Global Digital Transformation at New Era Technology. Steve, thanks very much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Kristian. I appreciate it.
So let's start in the beginning. What are the key shifts in the AI and Gen AI landscape that have had the biggest impact on customers' ambitions and the challenges that they're facing with them?
Well, some of the biggest shifts is honestly how quickly everything is moving. I think when it first kind of blew up the world 3 years ago, or almost 3 years ago, people were waiting to see, what the capability was and what it could bring to their companies and their employees. The challenge is now that it's literally moving too fast. I mean, the velocity of change is just ever present, especially in the past 6 months or so, with more deep reasoning models and all the tooling and like I said, the velocity and change of the products. It's really scaring a lot of organizations now to really kind of jumping in with both feet and getting started. So I think we're seeing a lot of companies, pulling back a little bit and possibly waiting until later this year or even 2026.
Okay, excellent. Well, also, as you said, companies are waiting to see what's next before they dip their feet in. But I was wondering, when companies do decide to take on this challenge of, integrating AI into their workplace, which should come first? Should it be getting the data right, getting the organization ready, or making technology choices that they've really invested in researching on? And how should leaders prioritize?
That's a great question, Kristian. I think a lot of it is the data is probably what we point people to first, especially in generative AI, because you're creating new content or new data from existing data. So if that data is bad, you're just going to create something that's really bad. But very quickly after that, it's the organization needs to change. You really need to kind of look at, while you're remediating some of your data issues, look at how you can rebuild or re-architect workflows or even entire business processes, thinking AI first. And so take that time. Don't let it be wasted per se. Waiting on your data or your security to be ready. Use that time to think about how you can really incorporate it. Where are the real big areas that you can do fairly small changes or small adoption of AI, but get some really big impact? So that when your data is ready, the organization will be ready, and then you can make, like your third question, the technology decisions. And based on my previous answer, maybe things will settle down by the time you're ready with your data and your organization. Then the technology will be at a point where I think that the companies will feel more comfortable with adopting it. But we also do recommend our clients to also look at using existing tools like Copilot Studio and other things to build simple tools, simple solutions that kind of are very surgical in nature, that look for a particular area of focus, that again can give even a smaller bit of knowledge or experience with generative AI solutions. And that can help both the data and security and the organizational change management needs of the organization.
Okay, excellent. You talked a bit about how New Era advise companies and customers. I was wondering also, how does New Era advise organizations struggling with this sort of proof of concept limbo, especially with expensive tools like Copilot in the mix?
Yeah, that's what we're seeing a lot of, and I think a lot of the research is even confirming that. A lot of even research recent from Gartner and others are showing that a lot of organizations are canceling or slowing down production rollouts after doing a proof of concept, and a lot of the reason is they're not seeing the return on investment they anticipated. Like you said, the experience, the tools, the tech, the remediation efforts that we just talked about require a significant amount of investment, and the market and the media talks about how quickly you're going to see returns. The challenge is organizations don't know what to measure just yet, and until that really kind of comes to fruition, I think the proofs of concept are still going to languish a bit. It's not until you really see specific measures, and that's part of what I talked about in looking at workflow remodeling and things like that, is identify those key pieces of objective data that can be truly measured, and measure against those when you do your POC. For example, we do a lot of work with AI and application development, coding tools like GitHub Copilot or even Claude Code. There's specific application development metrics that can be managed and measured to show improvement by adopting AI tools. Those just aren't really around in a lot of the other areas of focus in Gen AI right now. But I think more and more we're going to see the case where it's just going to be, you're not going to think about doing it any other way than doing it with an AI tool.
Okay. Well, speaking of ROI, what practical steps can organizations take from the very outset that can help them measure and also communicate the ROI of Copilot and other AI initiatives?
Well, as far as kind of general AI solutions, it's really about taking that process breakdown, really looking at process mining and seeing if you can find areas where you can use tooling to help identify or solve some particular issue, whether it's quality or timing or number of resources, whether it's human resource or other resource. And really focus on those is where you can get your return on investment. For example, if it takes 3 days to do something, for example, to draft a proposal, maybe if you look at a particular part of that process using generative AI tools, for example, doing a draft review, instead of taking a day of that 3 days, maybe you cut it down to 4 hours. That's a dramatic effect. And you multiply that by the number of proposals you do as an organization, and you get some real numbers. I think that's the big focus, is really just kind of look at peeling back the onion, so to speak, on your tasks and jobs to be done, identify those areas and focus on those, which isn't a new thing. I mean, that's the Toyota Toyota production system that was made famous in the 70s talked about finding specific areas of focus in the manufacturing process and creating change there and seeing that ripple effect through the rest of the organization. And the same is true with Copilot and the rest of the Gen AI tools out there.
Speaking of peeling back the onion, I was wondering, could you tell us a bit about how New Era's own internal deployment of Copilot has helped shape your offering to customers and your approach, and what worked, what was challenging, and what surprised you?
Right. So we adopted customer zero when we looked at Copilot, and a lot of it was driven by the feedback we were getting from our own customers about some of the challenges with remediating problems with data and security, or doing the organizational change management and looking at adoption and things like that. And we decided who better to experiment with than ourselves. So earlier this year, we worked with our chief information officer to identify what needed to be done and then started the rollout to about 300 users internally. And it was really interesting because we saw some of the issues that our clients were bringing up to us. We saw we had data problems. And so we had to implement Purview to help remediate some of those data problems before we started rolling out large number of Copilot seats. And then we started red teaming prompts and getting kind of ideas with that. And then once we started rolling out, we were trying to say, okay, how do we measure engagement? How do we measure how successful this is? And so we leveraged some of the new features that Microsoft released with Viva Insights and built our own dashboard so we can measure usage and engagement and see how our users are using the tool, where they're using the tool, by job role, by geography, and a bunch of other dimensions that help us manage that. And then on the change management side, we looked at Viva Engage and SharePoint. How can we use existing tools that are part of Microsoft 365 to really kind of push change management? How can we create a community? How can we get people to post about how they've been using Copilot? And it's been a fantastic resource in that regards, because we're having peers helping peers. So since we've started that project, I've had client conversations and told them how we're doing a customer first approach, and they love hearing the pains and gains, so to speak, that New Era has been through in the past few months, and that we can really tell the story. And I think that's important. And plus, it gives us tools that we can provide our clients as well as part of their rollout plans when they work with New Era technologies.
Just digging into that change management aspect, how crucial would you say this is in sustaining Copilot use?
It is. I'd put it up in like the 80 to 90% importance. In my opinion, I guess one recent research study I read says that 10% of the problems are when you roll out generative AI. 10% of the problems are security, 20% is data, and 70% is change management. It's all about how to use these tools. How do I effectively incorporate them in my workflow? Otherwise, they're just not going to be used. And with Copilot being kind of ever present, being part of everybody's productivity suite in Outlook and Word and PowerPoint and Excel and others, it's there with you, and it truly is a Copilot. So it's really teaching people, what it's capable of, how it can help them. But also you have to put that against, there's some anxiety of is this generative AI tool going to replace me? So it's a lot of it is AI literacy, basic literacy of the what and why, and then it's the tool literacy, it's the how, and so we really focus on that. And like I said earlier, our we call it the Copilot Center of Excellence, helps drive that adoption, and we as the core project team don't engage much with that team because they kind of work with each other. The 300 users kind of help each other, and that just helps foster the change management even more because we're getting people sharing how Copilot is helping them, and people are taking that, and it just becomes the network effect of sharing that information across the organization.
Excellent. I was wondering, so this sharing of information regarding Copilot, like what are some unexpected benefits and perhaps even unexpected risks that come with this? But what is the overall sort of impact on Copilot use when you have this open forum?
Well, the positive impact has been phenomenal. I mean, we've got people that have really, really jumped in to using Copilot literally every day on kind of basic email and basic calendaring and things like that. But then, even further, we've got people that are crafting their own prompts to do real client work that needs to get done, and it has helped us be more efficient. And having Copilot have access to everything in our Microsoft 365 tenant with all our SharePoint data and all the rest, it helps find and elucidate historical data within the organization that people have honestly forgotten about. And so, having these people share prompts and saying, I tried this prompt and I found a PowerPoint presentation from 3 years ago that was exactly what my client needed. It just helps us be more effective. The risk side of it is we want to make sure our associates aren't too dependent upon it. We want them to understand it being a tool, but not completely think of that being the only tool that you have, right? I mean, it's a great support. That's why I tend to call it augmented intelligence, not necessarily artificial intelligence. It's meant to help you, not to replace you. And so there's still a lot of things that a person, a human with human agency can do, and is important, especially in the consulting business, especially in technology consulting and even in a new technology like generative AI, where it's what we bring to the table, helps too. So some of the risk is yes, we're being very successful with the tools, but also temper that a little bit with understanding some of the other areas around, usage and security and agency and things like that.
Okay. And let's say a company is kind of in their journey of AI and Copilot, and then, their executive asks, how do I know Copilot is actually delivering value? What evidence or metrics should this person look to give to the executive?
Oh, that's a great question. And it kind of goes back to the objectives measures that I talked about earlier. And it's really kind of finding specifics. So for example, in our engagements where we work with GitHub Copilot, we look at generally accepted application development metrics like cycle time. How long does it take to get from a request going into that request going into production? And we've seen research where that can cut 30% to even 50% of the time in that cycle time. So that's a very easy one. The harder ones are what we call soft dollar costs. Like I used Outlook to summarize a bunch of email threads, And I think Microsoft uses the term that it's going to help save a typical employee 12 minutes per day, and they kind of roll that up using a generic salary number to say this is what you're really saving. And that's a little bit hard to chase. There's a lot of gray area around that, and so that's why again we really kind of do process mining, look at specific things like lead times, like quality and things like that, and really measure those. In our dashboard, though, we do have an engagement score, and we're kind of playing around with this engagement score to really kind of understand the attribution of generative AI tools to the success of an employee, and that's just a very difficult thing to find. And it's not just Microsoft; it's really kind of an industry challenge right now. And we'll just have to see. And that's part of this whole trough of disillusionment period that we're in right now. Is what does it really mean? But there's been a lot of technologies that have been in the same spot in the past that are now generally accepted technologies. The web 25 years ago went through this same kind of ROI. Why should I build a website? And it's become, an obvious reason why you need to become it. Why do I need to do something with the cloud? Why do I need to give my employees cell phones or smartphones? I mean, we've kind of come through that area, and those have all become generally accepted, general purpose technologies now. And I think people are just kind of pushing the envelope for generative AI. I mean, we're still, we're only kind of 2.5, 3 years in for this technology to be really in the enterprise space. And that's relatively early if you look back at previous generations of technology adoption cycles. So, I'm a baseball fan. I like to say we're kind of in the first and second inning of the game still. We still got a long way to go.
Excellent. Well, speaking of long way to go, let's look into the future. What advice would you give organizations preparing for this wave of AI-driven change, given both opportunities and anxieties and the like?
Well, I think that's another great question, and there's a lot of spokes to that answer. I want to tell people just to find something and start working with it. Our kind of motto is think big, start small, and scale quickly. We've borrowed that from a lot of different sources to be open. But it's really, think big ocean. Think of what you think it can do for your organization, and then start small. Look at things like how can you use Gen AI to help your human resources? How can you use Gen AI to help your IT help desk and get started? But don't get caught up. The problem is I frequently talk about boiling the ocean. I think too many companies get caught boiling the ocean and start thinking about all the risks and all the concerns. When I forget who said it. I think it was Mark Cuban said that if you're not using generative AI or AI tools, your competitors are. And so you need to kind of be moving. So there is an impetus to make a move. But you do, again, need to be cautious. It's a new technology. There's a lot of change. So you have to temper it. So again, it's think big, start small, and scale quickly, and look for good partners like Microsoft and Google and Amazon, New Era, and several others that are kind of committed to this technology as being part of the future, and we're going to have to adapt to it quickly.
It's a nice place to leave it. Thanks for taking the time to speak to me today, Steve.
Sure, Kristian. I appreciate it. Thanks.
And thank you to the audience for watching. As usual, if you liked, don't forget to comment, subscribe, and stay tuned for the next one. Until then, see you next time.